Hello, I am Tamara, and today we are going to be making these adorable children's aprons that are hanging on the wall behind me. I had so much fun putting this tutorial together for you, so I hope that you enjoy making them as much as I enjoyed making them. I think that they turned out beautifully. They definitely will fit a smaller child. So if you do want to make any adjustments to this apron to make it a little bit bigger, I would suggest just adding to the length of the larger apron. So 3-4 inches in length there. And then as well on the bib at the top, I would just suggest adding 2 inches up and 2 inches wider and not adjusting anything else. I think that you would still get a very nice apron for a larger child if you did it that way. Okay, I think I have mentioned everything. Oh, there is a printout version to this tutorial, so if you're interested, I have that linked in the description down below, as well as all of the items that I use in this tutorial. I hope that you guys enjoy this. Now let's get started. From the main piece of fabric, you will cut one large piece of fabric at 14 inches by the width of the fabric, so around 42 inches. And then you will need to cut 2 pieces for your waistband, and you will cut those at 2.5 inches by 16.5 inches. Then for your ties, you will cut 2 strips of fabric at 3 inches by the width of the fabric again, so around 42 inches in length. And then you will cut those in half. So you will end up with 4 pieces of fabric measuring at 3 inches by around 21 inches in length, and you can trim those selvages away. Then from your secondary piece of fabric, you will need to cut 2 squares out at 8.5 inches wide by 7 inches high. This will be for the front bib, and then for the smaller front apron, you will cut 1 piece of fabric at 10 inches high by 16 inches wide. You will also need around 36 inches of lace. So the first thing that we are going to do is make our ties. So take the 4 strips of fabric that are 3 inches by 21 inches and press them in half, right sides together. Then mark a 1/4 inch in from one end by the fold. Mark 2 inches in from the same end but by the open side. Then you will draw a line connecting these 2 marks. So a 1/4 inch seam allowance from one end of the tie all the way to that 2-inch mark. Then along that marked line to create a point. You will trim away the excess fabric at the point, and then we can turn our ties right side out. This is easier to do using a turning tool, but you can do this without. I love using this particular turning tool. I will have it linked in the description down below if you're interested. Press the points out gently. I like to use a plastic chopstick for this. And then iron your ties flat before sewing a final scant 1/4 inch seam around the entire edge. And of course, you will do this for all 4 ties. Next, it's time to create the bib. So grab your 2 bib panels and lay one right side face up. Then grab 2 of the 4 ties that we just created and lay them on top of this bib panel with the points facing down. Measure in at around 1 inch from both edges, and that's where your ties can lay. And then just scooch your ties up about 1/2 inch past the actual top of the panel. Next, grab your second panel and lay it right side face down on top of that, creating a nice little sandwich. Pin around all 3 edges, the left, the top, and the right. We will sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance along all 3 edges, leaving that bottom section open. Once you've done this, then trim away the 2 top corners before turning your project right side out. Gently push out those 2 corners. I like to use my plastic chopstick for this, and then give it a nice press. Once it's pressed, then sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around all 3 edges one more time. And now it's time to prepare our waistband. So grab the 2 pieces that you cut out at 2.5 inches by 16.5 inches and lay one panel right side up. Then grab the 2 other ties that we created and you will lay them so that the raw edge of the tie is facing 1/2 inch
past the outer edge of one of those panels, and then you will center it in between. You'll do that on both sides, of course, folding away the excess of the ties so you don't end up sewing over them. Then sandwich the ties together by using that second waistband piece and just lay that right side face down. Pin along both short edges, and then you will sew across both of those short edges using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We will then set this waistband aside for later. Next, let's prep the larger apron. So what we really need to do is just sew a hem around 3 edges of this apron. Start by sewing a hem along the bottom first. So you'll fold that edge in a 1/4 inch, press it, fold it in a 1/4 inch again, press it one more time, pin across that edge, and then sew a seam along that edge. Then do the same on both short sides.
Just a quick interruption to remind you that I have the printed version in the description down below. I'm bringing it up because I do have a pattern piece in that printed version, which will make it easier to do the smaller apron. So if you're interested, check that out. Otherwise, hit that subscribe button if you don't want to lose me on YouTube. Now let's keep sewing.
Next, it's time to prepare the smaller apron. So take your 16-inch by 10-inch piece of fabric and fold it in half. Now, if you want to, you can just trim away the edges so that you're rounding them out a little bit, or you can use the printed PDF that I have linked in the description down below. And in there is an actual pattern piece that you can use to trace a nice curve here as well. Next, it's time to attach our lace. So grab your lace and lay the top edge of your lace. And if there is a right side and a wrong side to your lace, make sure that the right side of your lace is laying against the right side of your fabric panel, and then you'll pin it around the entire edge. Once you've attached it to your panel, then sew a 1/4 inch seam around that entire thing, attaching your lace. Then you can fold your lace out. You can also press the lace out at this point, but you need to be very careful when doing so. Do not have your iron on a high heat setting, and pin the lace so that it stays in the outer direction before sewing a scant 1/4 inch seam around that entire edge. That will hold the lace down and give you a really nice edge. And then trim away any excess lace. And now it's time to gather your fabric along the top of your larger apron as well as the smaller apron that we've just created. To do this, I will link to a tutorial that I have on how to gather fabric for a ruffle. You'll do the second version in that tutorial. I will have that linked in the description down below. But just for a quick reference, essentially what I'm doing is I'm doing a very long basting stitch. I do 2 stitches across the top edge, and then I take the top thread and I slowly pull it along that edge, slowly gathering the fabric. You will need to gather the large apron so that it measures 16 inches wide. You will gather the smaller apron to around 13 to 14 inches wide. Next, take the smaller apron that has the lace and lay it on top of the larger apron. Center it along the top and then just sew a 1/4 inch seam across the entire top. That way you've attached the 2 aprons together. Now we need to attach the waistband to the apron. So tuck the apron into the waistband loop. Make sure that the loop is still facing right side in. Pin across the top and then sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance across that pinned edge, making sure not to sew over those ties. Now you can turn your waistband right side out, gently push out those corners, and then take it to your iron and just press those edges flat. Now along the top of that waistband, you will fold that raw edge inwardly at around a 1/2 inch and then press that in place as well. Then you can center the bib in between the waistband and then pin it. You'll sew an 1/8 inch seam allowance around the entire waistband. This will secure the bib in place as well. And finally, if you can see any of your gathering stitches, those basting stitches still, even though your apron is finished, you can just pick those out because those are no longer needed. And then give it one final press for good measure.
And that, my friends, is how you can make a child's apron. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give me that thumbs up. It helps YouTube share this tutorial with others, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful day. I will see you next time. Bye for now.